Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Real Estate Startup Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Mikayla Potterbaum, and this is my co-host, Benjamin Goodpasture, out in Redding, California. I'm in Nashville. Today, we're excited to interview one of our friends, Aaron Wright, who is a property rental manager, and he's just an awesome guy. And we get into some really cool nitty-gritty things today. Benjamin, what was some of your favorite takeaways from the conversation we had with Aaron today?
I think experience. Aaron has a lot of experience. I think it's sobering to know that Airbnb isn't always this lucrative, cash making machine. There's actually a lot of risk involved in starting an Airbnb. And so just really knowing what you need and researching it from local laws, all that stuff is so important when you jump into the short-term rental game.
Yeah. I think for me, some of my favorite things were just talking to him about his progression from moving from Kentucky to California and just seeing, them going from knowing nothing and diving in the deep end and to now managing your boutique resort and just everything they've learned in between. We talk about things like ways that you can protect your Airbnb by putting, a sound monitor in or Ring doorbell or things like that. And then just a lot of other good stuff. So I think this was helpful for me. I had a lot of great takeaways and I'm excited to hop into the conversation now. So enjoy the conversation and let's go.
Aaron Wright, welcome to the Real Estate Startup Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
To start off, how did you get started in real estate?
We first started, so my wife and I, with our first home, it was a fixer. And so that's kind of how we got our feet wet. And when I say it was a fixer, it was a fixer. It was rough. And so that was kind of like our training ground, just learning about fixing and flipping. And so we flipped a couple homes in Kentucky, living in California now, but we flipped a couple homes there. And honestly, we didn't really know about the short-term rental world. I mean, we knew about it. We had used Airbnb for travel, but never crossed my mind to consider hosting, actually, until we met you, Benjamin. So once we landed in Redding, started hearing the buzz about Airbnb. We're like, wow, this is an interesting market that I think we should be tapping into. And so for the last 3.5 years, we've been running a vacation rental management company. We also co-host. We also house hack currently for a home we bought here in Redding. And so it's been an adventure the last 3.5 years for sure.
That's amazing. What year did you buy your first home in Kentucky?
2008.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the interesting time for real estate for sure. I think our interest rate was 7.25, something around there.
Hey, that's what I have now.
Yeah.
Full circle.
I know. Full circle, right. We were fortunate enough to get a good rate in Redding before things kind of jumped up on us.
Nice.
But yeah, we owned that home. We actually lived in that house for a while. So we kept making improvements, building equity in it. And so when we sold it, we made a nice little profit on it. And then we bought another home and we did something very similar. We lived in it for a little while and then fixed it up and sold it, made a little money, kind of rinse and repeat. And then that's when we moved to California and just jumped into the Airbnb world. So we've really, it's been a blessing for us. The market has certainly changed in the last 3.5 years from when we first started, but there's still money to be made.
Absolutely. And can I ask you, Aaron, when did you move to California?
We moved during COVID, during 2020.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have rentals currently in Kentucky still, or you sold?
No, we sold those properties.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And where in Kentucky was that?
Central Kentucky. So we're from the Lexington area. We're
Okay.
actually just from a town just south of Lexington.
Okay.
Lexington is where the university is located.
Yeah. I'm based in Nashville, so it's kind of just up the road from us here.
Okay, yeah.
So
Not far at all.
decently familiar with the market and kind of was just curious if you're still holding on to properties there. But yeah.
We're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounded
Super
like your
cool.
strategy was the live and flip. So basically you move in, you fix it up over time, and then you sell it for a profit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's such a good strategy, especially for first-time home buyers that maybe you don't have a lot of money to, fix it up before you move in. You just kind of just slowly do it as you cash flow. And yeah, that's amazing. So you moved to Reading. How did you get started in the short-term rental world when you got to Reading?
You had a lot to do with that. We met you.
Yeah.
Benjamin was our landlord. So we were renting from Benjamin.
Nice.
And Benjamin was just kind of getting this property management company off the ground, and he was juggling so many different things. And he came to my wife and I and was like, would you guys be interested in taking this over? I have a full plate. We worked out a deal and we took that over and started managing his properties as well as several other people's here in Reading and a couple areas outside of Reading. It was literally just jump in. Like, we didn't know what we were doing. We started just kind of shadowing a little bit, and then it was just jump in. We learned a lot the hard way. We didn't really have a coach. That would have been nice to have had, but we learned a lot, and I don't regret it, doing it the hard way, just because I think we have some insight that maybe other people don't have. But it's been really, really, really fun doing it.
That's amazing, man. Yeah, that was in 2020, end of 2020, when we sold you. Reading Station was the management company at the time. And, such a different market than, looking back now, what would you say are the differences in the short-term rental market?
Yeah, I would say, during that time period, you didn't have to be so strategic about your Airbnb, right? If you had a 3-bed, 2-bath house, you could pretty much put it on there as long as you had decent photos, and you're going to get business right out of the gate. And you have to strategize a lot more now. Your product has to be something that stands apart from everyone else's. So I think that's the biggest difference. I think the market is certainly more saturated here than it was then. And so because the competition has increased, you definitely have to make your product stand out. And so whether that's how you stage, using, professional photos, and those things obviously made a difference 3.5 years ago, but I think it really factors in now. If you don't have that in place, if you don't have a home that's going to stand apart from everyone else, you're not going to do well. Not in this market.
I think that's also to your point. I've heard a lot of that just overall across the country, and I think even maybe somewhat globally too with Airbnb. But I have an Airbnb in Panama City Beach, Florida, and flipped it last summer and was like, dear God, please let this rent out, because everyone was saying Airbnb is Airbnb bust, right? And so you're like, okay, how's this going to go? But we did our best to furnish it simply, but like nice, modern, clean, minimal, and then take really good pictures. And we just put it out there and try to have decently competitive pricing. And it stays pretty well booked. Like, we had a little lull in the winter because that's just Florida, that we're in the Panhandle. So it's a little different than like Miami. But I found that there wasn't, it's still doing fine. But I think that I would like to think it's partially because we just took the extra step to like make sure we had good furnishings and good photos. Do you see, like, sounds like that's what you're saying, but do you have listings or work with people that just don't put the same effort in, and you see it just doesn't perform as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if we have someone who reaches out to us that has kind of already taken it upon themselves to stage the home and put certain things in there, or they say, oh, I already have photos, You never want to insult anyone, but you're kind of like, oh, that's not
it's a red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing that I'm seeing is a key difference between now versus then. Trying to build a brand. It seems like that is really kind of the future, I think, of Airbnb, is having a legitimate vacation home that stands apart from just your cookie cutter home. And then also building a brand surrounding that. So social media, just getting more eyes on it, more attention. And I think that's what people are having to do. I mean, it's no secret if you get on Airbnb right now, that's what they're pushing. You know, they've got their OMG listings. They have all these different categories now to create more of an experience for people. And so it's not that wasn't important 3 years ago, but I just think it's more important now.
Totally agree. Yeah.
So what do you think are the big pros and cons of doing a short-term rental versus having a long-term rental? I mean, both you guys have experience in this, and love to hear, what you think is the pros and cons of short-term rentals.
Yeah. I think my opinion is living in California, if you have long-term rentals, there's the tenant-friendly state. So
Right.
There's that. That's a biggie. And so when you're doing short-term rentals, you don't have to worry about that, unless you're allowing people to stay within that window of time that would give them tenant rights. But I think, long-term rental is certainly more passive. And short-term rental is active. It's very active. You can create systems and put a team in place that can make it more passive. But I think those are the key differences. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I would say, or I would love to ask you too, and both of you, what have you guys experienced in the realm of midterm rentals? Because as far as I understand, it sounds like Redding changed some of their regulations or has gotten more tight. Or how has that kind of evolved for you guys? Because I know here in Nashville, they really tightened up, and you either have to be really have to be owner occupied or pay $1 million and get a non-owner occupied, unit that's just rare. Or you've been grandfathered into that non-owner occupied, 5-6 years ago. But someone like myself I wasn't buying 6 years ago. So how has that evolved for you guys out there as far as midterm rentals go?
Yeah, you want me to speak into that? Yeah. So when you say midterm rentals, you're just basically talking about 30-day stays versus nightly rentals. I still see a demand for that here. I think there's an increasing demand for midterm rentals because the market fluctuates so much with short-term rentals during the slow season. We are owner occupied. We're house hacking right now, and we do 30-day stays on Airbnb in our little studio. And it's been consistently booked for almost 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's with the exception of one tenant, it's been consistently booked on Airbnb for 30-day stays. And so we've been blessed enough to get just the ideal guest who has continued to extend their stay for work-related reasons.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you just run into that. We have a lot of people coming to Redding for work purposes. They're developing a lot of different things around here. And so a lot of work crews passing through. So yeah, I think that's a lot of people's strategy right now. I'm seeing a lot of people get out of the short-term rental space and move into the midterm rental just because it seems more secure financially.
Right. And what are your thoughts, Benjamin, on that?
Yeah, I got some thoughts. So, Aaron, we probably had 6 to 10 of those at one point that you were managing, right? At least.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
wow.
That was 21, 22, and maybe some of 23, but they did well in 21 and 22. I felt like in the beginning, we were really pushing our prices up pretty high. I think we were getting, in some units even, over close to $2,500 a month for, a 2-bedroom.
That's awesome.
And this is like an apartment. So, it's great because one, you're not paying the TOT taxes on it. It's less management. You're not dealing with all these turnovers and cleanings and not paying the TOT taxes, and it's just simple. So I like that, just the ease of management, and just to have that constant income was great. But then for me, I felt like it slowed down a lot in 23. And so I turned a lot of those into long-term rentals. So I guess my progress was, short-term rentals. We started in 2015. They were doing really great. And then I noticed, during COVID, there was kind of an increase, and it was doing, well. And then 22 and 23, it just slowed down. So I turned most of my 30-night rentals into long-term because it just wasn't performing. But I think that's the beauty of real estate, is that you can move and pivot with the market and what's happening. Yeah. And so you don't have to be, fixed on short-term, midterm, or even long-term. It's like, okay, what's working best? What's the best for this property? Which I really like that. And I think it's important because especially when city regulations are constantly changing for short-term rentals, it was much different back in 2015 versus now. I mean, you had a $300 one-time fee to get a permit. Very simple. Now, you're talking $1,000 every year to renew it. Yeah. And they're talking about density where, you can't have a short-term rental within 300, 400 feet, 500 feet from the next one. Wow. And potentially they're saying that you can only have up to like 2 short-term rentals. So if you had like 10 and they change this law, you would have to turn those into long-term rentals. And then even some areas like Seattle or take like Hawaii. Hawaii considers anything under 6 months to be a short-term rental. Wow. Which is crazy. Or like Seattle, they don't allow it anymore because it just was conflicting so much with long-term tenants. There's no housing for the locals. So I remember my father-in-law from the beginning just being like, hey, this is risky. You need to have a plan B in case the city changes the laws on you.
That's right.
So that's something that I've been aware of. But midterm, like I said, I think it did really well for us for a season. And then we just made a pivot. So.
Yeah. And just to your point, Benjamin, I mean, New York City. Look at what they just did in New York City. I mean, it's not that you can't get a permit anymore. it doesn't matter. You just can't do Airbnb. So even if you had a permit, it's all shut down. So suddenly the hotel prices skyrocket because the demand for hotels is suddenly through the roof because you can't get an Airbnb. Everyone's trying to pivot to some sort of midterm rental or just sell. So it changes the entire landscape of the market once you have a city that's shut down like that. And I think New York is speaking to kind of the direction that other cities are going. Like we just had an oversaturation in general. But the smaller markets like Reading or even a small city like Nashville or Lexington, Louisville, like I think there's still a lot of room in there. But I think all of this speaks to the need to have multiple exit strategies when you buy a property. Because like I bought my properties in 2023 when interest rates were, I'm getting like high 6s, low 7s. And I'm doing the math on this and I'm like, this place, like my rental, one of my rentals in Nashville, it's like, I was doing the numbers on it. I'm like, I can't keep this property because I was going to flip it. I flipped it and I'm like, should I keep it or should I sell it? It's like, I can't afford to keep this if I'm not making something on it. Now I was able to convert it to a midterm rental and it cash flows close to $1,000 a month. And that's great. I'm happy with that. But I realize that if some regulation changes and I can no longer do that, or it's just too hard, or there's just too many headaches, I need to have another backup plan. So my thought was, if I can't do midterms, I need to at least make sure I break even at a long-term rental rate, which is harder to do with these interest rates. So for someone like yourself, Benjamin, or maybe you as well, Aaron, if you've bought before things skyrocketed, then some people have more margin in there. They're able to kind of, I can do long-term rentals because I have the margin. Someone like myself, it's a little bit more risky because I bought when it was so high, right? So my cash flow is less. But what do you guys have to say to that in regards to someone newer getting in the game now, trying to figure out what's my best strategy for long-term, midterm, or short-term?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think midterm is risky because there's always the potential for gaps. So even if you get someone who commits for 90 days, you don't know what the next 90 days are going to look like. And so I think that's one of the advantages to locking down, a 12-month lease, even though you might not cash flow the same. So yeah, there's so many things you need to take into consideration when making that decision. And so I think one of the reasons, Benjamin, we saw that drop off the last year or so with the midterm rentals is because I think so many more people are starting to pivot towards that were in the short-term rental space. I think more people are on that bandwagon. So there's a lot more 30-day rentals available. People were kind of shy about letting anyone stay there. A lot of people wouldn't let anyone stay in their rental for more than 2 weeks at a time. And I think now that the market's starting to shift, we're seeing more midterm rentals. And so we were able to kind of get in on that early when there weren't as many people doing it. And so we were booked, like he said, consistently really well for a while. And then it started to fall off. There's still people that are doing well, like we are with our studio, like I said. But once this person checks out, I don't know what the next 3 months, 6 months are going to look like. We don't have a lease in place. So for someone who's looking to get into it, I think, yeah, you make a great point. What are your margins and what kind of risk are you willing to take in regards to having gaps versus, only cash flowing a little bit, but having a secured tenant for 12 months or more?
Yeah. And so like, to your point, literally right before I got on this podcast, I went over to my midterm rental and I just had tenants leave on Saturday and they came in July and they thought they were staying for one, 90-day stay. And it turned out to be whatever that was between July and now. So it was a lot longer. Definitely. So that happens too, where you're like, the tenant gets comfortable, you get a good relationship with them. And we had a great connection and they stayed. And it was awesome because it's a midterm rental. So it's kind of like more cash flow than I would be getting if it was long-term, but it kind of felt like a long-term because they stayed so long. But then here we are, they check out and I suddenly have a 3-week gap on this house. Right. And it's, Absolutely. It's costing me. And I have a good tenant coming soon, but it's costing me. And so I'm finding that it's a little bit hard to, because I'm self-managing. So it's a little bit hard to time it right to where I'm like, okay, I know they're leaving at this date. So I should probably make sure that I am really putting the word out there like 1 or 2 months prior. How do you like balance that as a host? Like, what do you have any tips or suggestions for someone in my shoes that's like trying to figure out how to time it? Because obviously, like, I have it on Furnish Finder and I have it on Airbnb and my calendars are up to date, but I still don't always know how to kind of get in there and push it at the right time.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? One thing I never do for midterm stays is instant booking. I always leave that off.
Yeah.
Because we want to screen those people as much as possible. And so just communication with your current tenant, like, hey, checking in. I know you're getting ready to check out in the next 3-4 weeks or whatever it may be. Any, possibility that you're going to be doing an extension. And so keeping that open line of communication when you do have a good guest, I think is important. But yeah, as far as there being like a secret sauce, I don't think there is.
Dang it.
To be honest. I know. I wish there was. Yeah. So I don't know. It's a balance for sure. You don't, if you open your calendar up too much and you're allowing for 30-day stays and someone only needs it for 30 days, 4 months from now, it's like, oh gosh, do I want to accept that booking?
Right.
Because that's going to leave us, what are the odds of me getting a 3-month booking that's just going to fit perfectly into that gap?
Right.
And so definitely one of the cons to doing midterm stays.
So you hear a lot of stories of guests trashing your house, throwing parties, breaking things. Do you have any stories of that happening, number one? And how do you prevent a guest from partying or trashing your house?
Yeah, I think external security cameras are definitely a necessity. And a lot of people put like a noise monitor somewhere on the
I
home
have that.
just so you can kind of monitor that.
What is that? I
100%.
never heard of it.
I think
Oh, it's awesome.
so it literally just measures like the decibel level of, I'm guessing it takes into account a certain distance from the home. But you can get on Amazon and buy them. It sounds like you can speak into that. Mikayla, you said you have one.
Yeah, I have one for my short-term rental in Florida. Just, I don't know. I think I was just targeted from an ad on Instagram, and I was like, that is a great idea. So I bought this monitor, and you're supposed to put it no higher than 5 feet above ground floor or the floor level. You attach it to your wall in the main living area, and you plug it in and you connect it to your Wi-Fi. And so I paid $10 a month for this service. And basically it tracks two things. The first thing it tracks is recreational smoking. So it will actually text me if someone's doing any form of recreational smoking, and it says the probability level. So it'll say 98%, probability that someone is doing recreational smoking in your living room. And that one I found to be a little bit less accurate than the noise monitor. The noise monitor part to me is more helpful because I want to know that my guests aren't disturbing my neighborhood. And it has really, really helped, I think, keep the like noise levels and party, activity down, because I'm loud about it in my listing. I'm like, this is a quiet neighborhood. We have great neighbors. We love our neighbors. We cannot party here, because it's in a spring break city, or a lot of people come down there to party. So we're really, really loud about that. But I've found that the people that are, daring enough to book a house that has that level of like loudness for their need to be quiet, they're usually pretty good people. And we just have tried to get really, really strict about it. And I like to think of myself as a nice person, but you just have to be more strict with these things. They need to know you have some level of authority. So yeah, whenever I get texts that say, for example, mine is set to send me a text if the decibel level is above 85 decibels for longer than 10 minutes. And so basically I'll get a text that says, this noise has sustained for over 10 minutes. And at first I didn't know how loud that actually was. I was like, how loud is 85 decibels? What if that's like just a conversation? Like one time I called a guest. I'm like, hey, my noise meter is going off. Just want to check in on you guys. And she's like, I can hear music in the background. She's like, oh, hey, yeah, me and the family are just playing this game of Uno. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're probably literally just laughing and playing Uno and have music playing. And it wasn't like they weren't partying or anything. But here was my mistake that I had made. I had left not one, but two sound systems in the house. And I had a subwoofer hooked up and I had a sound bar, and it was nice because I like that for when I'm there. I had left it there and people were, connecting their phones, and then they were blasting the music. So I'd get these texts that are just like, there's so much noise. And so one time I went down there for a visit, and I took that sound bar and I detached it from the subwoofer and I hid it in my owner's closet, locked it up. I have not had a single text come through since I hid my sound system. And I was like, man, I was just shooting myself in the foot by leaving that there. So that's another thing I would say, at least in my experience, it's been like, and I don't know, you guys probably have tons of stories like this, but I just found like, don't leave things in the house that are going to be a temptation for them to just get crazy with. So
don't leave your liquor bottles out, is what you're saying.
Yeah, maybe not that either. Yeah,
and there are people who do offer that like as a complimentary thing. So I personally wouldn't recommend it. Yeah.
So, I mean, are you, as far as minimizing this, like, how do you screen the guests to try to minimize this? Is there anything you can do?
I think just you kind of learn how to, and it's never 100%, but you learn how to communicate with guests prior to their arrival. If they seem very transparent about their plans, then you usually don't have anything to worry about. If they're very descriptive about what they're coming for, who they're traveling with, you don't really have a lot of questions to ask. They kind of filled in the blank. But when you have people who are just like super vague, hey, coming to visit, and that's literally all they say, and it's like a large group, for me, that's a red flag. I'm like, okay, you're coming to visit with 8 to 10 people, what are you guys coming into town for? I see you don't have any reviews, or I see you don't have, 5 stars. Like, I try to stay away from anyone who has less than 5 stars, but even then, it's not 100%. You can have someone that has 4 stars and they're a great guest. It seems like the larger homes are the ones that are more attractive for parties. So 4 bedrooms and up, I think, kind of start to fall into the danger zone.
The party zone.
I think when you're, the party zone. When you're 3 beds or less, I think it's less a risk.
I think it's very interesting. I was going to ask you, what do you think, or maybe you could describe a little bit of the difference between, this is like a little bit of a pivot here, but Aaron, could you speak to the difference between co-hosting and hosting? Like what is that?
Yeah.
What's the breakdown of that?
So if you're hosting, then everything's kind of under your name, under your profile. So for someone that's getting started, I personally think that unless they just don't want any involvement whatsoever, I highly recommend that you create your own listing, create your own profile, and consider getting a co-host if you don't want to manage. So you can create your listing, you set it up, you can get help from a co-host to do all of this if you don't have experience with it. But then a co-host basically is exactly like it sounds. They will basically shadow all of the communication. They can handle your calendar. They can be in control of scheduling cleaners, maintenance, addressing any concerns that come up. And basically the owner doesn't have to be involved, even though they may set up their listing as the primary host. They can pretty much delegate all responsibility to a co-host. And what that will allow is the owner to be able to kind of keep a bird's eye view on things as well. Like, okay, is the co-host responding to these messages? Are things getting taken care of that are coming up? And so it's kind of a win-win. If you're a co-host, you don't really have as much liability on you because there's some responsibility on that owner. And if for some reason, your management disappears, you can always get a new co-host. But if you hire someone who's a manager that's going to list that property under their name, if they decide to move on to greener pastures, you can't transfer that listing to the owner.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So that is a huge advantage to have the owner post it and then you, for example, come on as a co-host. Is that how you guys have your setup going with Benjamin's properties, or how do you guys do that?
We've done both.
Yeah, it wasn't that from the beginning. And it wasn't, I learned it the hard way. It wasn't through Aaron, but I have a cabin in Mount Shasta, and we had a different manager because at the time Aaron and Laura didn't really want to manage something, an hour away.
Sure.
And so I had this girl manage it, and she put it in her name. Anyways, we had a pretty big fallout. She stopped paying me and owed me a lot of money. And this kind of happened with several owners. It was crazy. And so I had to start over again. I had a bunch of reviews. I had momentum. It was a super host. So I had to get that listing back from her. And that was tricky to do. And then we just, I put it under my name. And then later asked Aaron if he would co-host it. And that's been great. But in the beginning, because he had a property management company, we had all the listings under his account. And then I think as we progressed, I realized that it'd be better to have it under our name. But yeah, I agree with you, Aaron. I think that's best for the owner. And then probably creates a little less liability for you, right?
Exactly. Because if you're co-hosting, it depends on how you structure and negotiate your deal with an owner or a landlord, whoever you're going to be managing for. But if you're a property management company, typically you're streamlining everything. So you're handling a lot of the expenses for that property. So you're kind of, a lot more moving parts. But if you're co-hosting, even though you might be managing for less of a commission, typically the responsibilities are less as well. So you're not managing, anything to do with utilities or lawn care, things of those nature. You could structure it however you wanted to, but there are a lot of people who are just co-hosting and all they're doing is handling communication, scheduling cleaners, scheduling maintenance, and just routine, like anything that breaks, that type of maintenance. And so the owner still has some involvement, and you can actually set it up to where those payouts are going into the owner's account too. So we have a trust account for the management company, which means we're paying the owners. And so you can kind of reverse that with the co-host system. And I just think it's a win-win for everybody when you set it up that way. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Wow, that's cool. Because I've been doing Airbnb stuff on and off for like the last several years, but I feel like the term co-hosting has really become more of like a trending thing the last year or two. So I've been kind of trying to dig into it and be like, okay, what's the difference between this and like hiring a management company? But it almost sounds like for someone who's trying to get involved in the short-term rental space or even midterm, but they want to get involved in the hosting space, maybe co-hosting is a good place to start. To just kind of like join someone, and because sounds like you can do it kind of virtually, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to get started.
I think it's always good to, manage it and just to learn it and see how much work it is. It is so much work to manage a short-term rental, an Airbnb, and it's worth every dollar you pay to a manager because of just not just the time, but the peace of mind that you get from it. Because, you have guests that can send you messages all throughout the night, during the day. And you got to be on it, to be a great host. You got to respond quickly. You got to be able to problem solve. Stuff happens, things break, you have leaks, you have issues. Yeah. And so if you want that kind of freedom, you need a manager. So I always think it's good to start off that way. Most people have the time. If you don't, and you have a job and this other stuff, I think it's worth it to hire someone. Mm-hmm. But, moving into the kind of next thing, Aaron, I really want to dive in and talk about kind of where you're at now. We recently bought a resort in Dunsmuir, and we brought you guys on to manage the bookings and, the whole back end system. Tell us a little bit about that, transitioning from short-term rentals, single family houses here and there to a resort that has close to 60 doors. What's that been like for you?
Loaded. It's been
this might be a therapy session.
I'm gonna call my shrink after this.
Let it all out.
It's been an adventure. Definitely, there were definitely similarities, but a lot of new territory getting into the commercial space. I think, one of the advantages, and I think more and more people are going to start looking at commercial properties because of all those regulations we've been talking about. So it's going to be more and more attractive. So, you're not dealing with permits. You're not having to worry about that. You're a commercial property. I think the biggest thing that I discovered early on transitioning into managing the resort is the amount of just communication. When they get on an Airbnb and they book a vacation home, there's a certain expectation that they have. When they book a property that's, a unit that's at a commercial property, they're expecting a certain level of service. And so transparency is really key. If you're going to run things remotely, if you're going to run that commercial property like an Airbnb, you have to really disclose that because people, they just expect a certain level of service and face-to-face interaction. whenever they show up to a property like that. And so we've continued to put systems in place and teams in place that has really improved things in the last year. But I think communication is definitely the biggest key difference that I've noticed with this world of managing the resort. Phone calls, people want to be able to call, they're traveling and you have a website, you allow direct bookings. So that is another element of communication there. And yeah, just having boots on the ground as much as possible is really key. When you're managing as many doors as Benjamin has, it's important to have a great team. Like it's critical, from your housekeeping to maintenance to someone who's running the front desk. It's really key.
Yeah, I think in the beginning we were thinking we could be more hands off, more remote check-in. We were like, hey, this is just another Airbnb, but we found out quickly that there's a past clientele, mostly I'd say the older generation, that would rather call you and make a booking versus do it online. And so we didn't answer the phone for probably the first 3 or 4 months and realized like that was hurting us. And so, treating it differently, like you're saying, there's different expectations for a hotel versus a Airbnb, a house. So yeah, talk to us a little bit more about those expectations and what kind of changes did you have to make to meet those expectations of the guests?
Yeah. So, we're still on Airbnb. I think one of the great things about what we've been doing the last year is incorporating OTAs, other online travel agencies. So you're getting more exposure. Having a website that sort of can handle online bookings well. I would say 80% of your bookings are direct. So you're not under the umbrella of Airbnb. You're not under the umbrella of Vrbo for most of these bookings. You are the go-to for everything. So having policy.
Yeah.
That's a big advantage,
right? It's a big advantage. There's, pros and cons, I think, maybe to it, but I think it's a bigger advantage than it is a disadvantage. Making sure that you have policies in place in the event you need to charge someone's credit card because they damage a room, learning how to put all those systems in place was really important. But just in terms of what you're saying in regards to the expectation that they want to be able to stay in their Airbnb. So Benjamin, you have kind of a unique product. So you've got a hotel, you've got Airstream, you've got modern cabins. And so it's funny, like
and rustic cabins that are basically like
exactly.
camping.
So we have a lot of different personalities on site at once. And so I think there's a different like expectation, even depending on which unit a guest books. If a guest books a hotel and they're older, they're expecting like a lot of customer service. We still get messages that are like, you guys don't have breakfast? I'm like, no, we don't offer breakfast. Not yet. And so, I never get that question when someone stays in a cabin. So it's just funny, some of the questions that come across, linen changes. Like you never expect to do a linen change for like a standard Airbnb, but when you're a commercial property, people are like, hey, can we get fresh towels? And so having something in place, whether it's someone on site that can handle those towels or you have like a closet with a keypad or different ways to do that. But yeah, it's an interesting process navigating guest communication and their expectations.
Yeah. And it's a lot that you don't realize, until you get in there and start doing it.
Right.
When I think about, operations and, for example, Andrew, who's kind of helping facilitate operations, he's like, hey man, we need to get something like golf carts because our cleaners are having to walk so much between each unit. It's exhausting. And they could be more efficient if they had something like a golf cart to drive around and do these cleanings. It would be more efficient. It would be faster. So, well, first, do you have any final thoughts on just what you've learned managing a resort versus, managing single Airbnbs?
I think there's just so much room to make more money with the resort. So many ways to increase income, whether you are creating packages, running promotions, or creating like retail items. Yeah. I just think the sky's the limit. As wild as you want to go with your imagination, I just think there's so many opportunities to make more money just besides simply letting someone sleep in a unit. I think that's the probably the main thing that I have discovered in managing the resort.
Because it's like you have all these hot leads coming in for 60 units, and you've got these people on your property already. If you have merch, if you have add-ons, if you have adventures, you have excursions, you have, we've been talking somewhat about like weddings or whatever, like they already trust your brand. So why not give them these opportunities? Have you guys been able to like lean into that yet? Or is this something that feels like it's kind of just percolating?
Yeah, we're evolving towards that more and more. I think one thing we're trying to do right now is grow our email list. So we are actually putting something in place so when a guest books, you only get the email for the booking. They get the confirmation in email, they get their instructions. And so right now we're putting a system in place that will allow us to capture everybody's email that's a part of that group. And so one of the ways to tap into that is having them log in with their email to use the internet. And so our email list is continuing to grow. And so, that really helps with marketing. And then we are talking through different things that we can create as a retail item at the front desk. And so whether it's like firewood or like a little barbecue kit that they can get, because we have a lot of Weber grills on site. We have a lot of solo stoves, little fire pits. Cool. And so just creating like little packages like that, that's things that we're kind of talking through at the moment.
I've done quite a bit of, I own a company that does elopements and micro weddings around the world. So we do a lot with boutique resorts kind of like this in several locations. So over the course of just kind of working with these different places, we've seen a lot of different small add-ons like this. But even down to the simple thing of like a s'mores kit, like, logs for your fire, or the craziest little thing that you think are just like, no big deal. But dude, people will just snatch it up because it's so convenient if you just have it ready. So super cool. I love what you guys are doing. I can't wait to come check it out sometime.
Yeah, Benjamin's killing it.
Thanks, man. There. One thing that, speaking of getting email lists going, I've been thinking about, it'd be fun if we had a splash page on our website that like right when you come to it, this thing pops up and it says, enter your email to get 5% off your next stay. Something like that to encourage whoever just goes to our website a discount to get their email address.
It's really cool.
Yeah. So
you could also have a thing that pops up and is like, welcome. And here's all the things you can add on while you're here. Here's our little boom, 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 all our options. But I'm even thinking about like
in the checkout,
my Airbnbs. Yeah. Like my Airbnbs, like it'd be so helpful to have email addresses. I'm wondering how much it would cost to like build out a little IT infrastructure in like just a normal house to capture emails like that. Cause everyone wants to get online. So that's so smart to get the emails like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And they actually have tools that you can, I forget what it's called right now. We're working with an IT guy who's sort of customizing this for us, but there's stuff that's out there that already integrates with MailChimp, and you just put these little access points in your home, and just like a regular Airbnb, and it will capture emails for you anytime someone's using the Wi-Fi.
That's cool. Cool hack.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So Aaron, what advice would you give a newbie that wants to get into the short-term rental game, wants to have their first Airbnb? What advice would you give them knowing what you know today?
Yeah, I think it depends on what kind of experience they have already. If they already have, because there are a lot of people who have real estate experience, but they don't have any Airbnb experience, or they have experience with tenants, but they've never done short term. And so I think the first question is like, what's your experience level, and how active do you want to be with this? If you want to tap into short term rental, I think the main questions right now are you actually investing into a legitimate vacation rental Is it a place that you would want to go and stay? I think that's what a lot of people are doing right now, is looking for lifestyle assets. They're looking for a home that actually fits their lifestyle, a place that they would want to travel to. And is there money to be made, during the time that they're not actually staying there? And so finding the key product, because I think there's so much buzz surrounding Airbnb, good and bad. I think it's not smart to just think, I'm just going to buy an investment property in any city and I'm going to turn it into an Airbnb. There's so many things that you need to take into consideration. One, if you can even turn it into an Airbnb, there might be regulations saying that you can't. For example, I know we were talking about this earlier, but there's an Airbnb across the street from me. So I cannot turn my house into an Airbnb, even if I wanted to. We're owner occupied, we're house hacking, so we don't fall into the same guidelines. But if we decide to sell, or if we decide to buy something else and move out of here, I have to see if their permit expires before I apply for one. And so there's you want to take that into consideration, figure out what your city regulations are. And if you can find a home that's truly unique, then I think it's worth considering a short-term rental. And then also asking yourself, do you have a good contact for a manager? If you're not going to be involved, if you're not going to be active with it, you need to be able to find someone that's trustworthy. You don't want to end up in a situation like Benjamin did with his Mount Shasta cabin and have someone run off with money. So you want to find, ideally you would find someone who is referred, that, you have someone else that has experience with them. And if you are looking to manage, I think back to what we were saying earlier, I think co-hosting is a great way to get started with that.
That's awesome. Super cool. So if someone has an Airbnb or they're thinking about opening one and they just know, okay, I got a W-2 or I just have a busy life and I don't want to manage this myself, what kind of margin are they talking about as far as losing off the top? Like what kind of percentage of payout is good or normal in the short-term space if someone's looking for a co-host or someone to manage the property for them?
Yeah, it's really going to vary depending on location. Like I just recently heard about this girl that's in LA who runs a co-hosting business. She only co-hosts and she's killing it. She's managing 50 properties, and at a minimum, her houses are making like $6,000 a month. I think she's averaging about $8,000 per property. So she's actually making $80,000 a month. But she has a team. She is as a co-host. And granted, she's scaled to a place where she has to have a team, right? She's got her own cleaners, her own maintenance people.
Go her. It's amazing.
And so, yeah. And I think so all that to say, I can't do that. You can't make that here, but you can still make decent money. So I think it really comes down to what the demand is in the area that you're looking to potentially start an Airbnb in. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, I think it's good. I was just curious. I know a lot of people say that 20% is a pretty standard payout for a management company and I've seen I just got a letter in the mail yesterday for someone a company that's offering 15%. And I've heard other people doing it for less and there are other people for doing it for more like 25. I just kind of seems to be all over the map. And I feel like it has to do with how much they're offering. There's a lot that goes into it. So, and then there's also scale. If you have multiple properties, maybe you can get it for less and so forth. But generally speaking, I was just curious if you have like a number that you're like, 20% is fair, find someone at that rate.
I think it depends on on the property too. So if you're managing a 5-bedroom home versus a 2-bedroom home, or a house that has a pool versus not having a pool, like there's just going to be a lot more things in place for a larger home than a smaller home. And so I think it's safe to say anywhere from 10 to 20%. I think the girl that I was just referring to as a co-host, she is charging on average 20%, but she has a range between, I'm guessing there's some wiggle room for negotiations depending on the home. So she has a range between 15 and 20%.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. No, that's awesome. That's super helpful. I feel like we could just chat about this stuff all day. But as we begin to wrap up, I wanted to ask you a question that's kind of like totally off this topic. And just knowing that you're married, do you have any kids, or are you married? No kids. Okay.
No kids yet.
What do you and your wife do for fun outside of work? Sounds like you guys are hustling and getting after it. But outside of that, what's fun and just pastimes look like for you guys?
Yeah, well, for us, it's getting just fresh air. I mean, that's one of the great things about living in Redding is you've got Mount Lassen just east of here, Mount Shasta just north of here. So many incredible lakes. In the summer months, you could just about guarantee any downtime we have, we're going to be on a paddleboard somewhere. So that's kind of our go-to. And I know Benjamin, he's more adventurous than I am.
I don't know, man. You do a lot of cool stuff. I always see you like you're going hiking and stuff. But yeah, there's a lot to do around here. We're blessed, aren't we?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I got two final questions for you. The first one is, what does the next 5 to 10 years look like for Aaron and Laura in real estate?
Yeah, I want to continue learning about the commercial space. I think this is going to be the sweet spot for a lot of people. I think the next 5 years, I would love to own a small boutique hotel of my own.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would be the ultimate goal. What was your other question?
Well, yeah, that was the first one. Just like, what is the next 5 to 10? So you're saying you'd want to own a boutique hotel in the next 5 to 10 years? That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think the last thing is, obviously, so we have social media. That's how a lot of people perceive who we are. Let's say you didn't have any social media accounts and you had no website or anything like that. What are 3 things that you would want the world to know about you?
First and foremost, my faith, which is just number one. I mean, putting God first. Seek first the kingdom and all these things will be added to you. So as long as I'm keeping that at the forefront for me, I'm a believer in Christ. So faith is just everything for me. So as long as I'm keeping the main thing, all of this other stuff is just secondary, right? And it works out. And so 3 things. Wow, you put me on the spot. That's number 1. Number 2 is if I wanted someone to know 3 things about me, I didn't have social media. Never been asked that question before. I consider myself a creative. So I think, I love creative projects. I love fixing homes. I'm a musician. I love playing music. And I think all those things actually kind of factor into even real estate, right? Because you're always 100%. Trying to think outside the box. You're always trying to be creative. And so I think just being a creative, it gets those juices flowing. And so whether you're just writing a song, you're still thinking outside the box and doing that. And the same thing translates to managing properties. Like you're always looking for creative ways to create a better experience for the guests, creative ways to streamline the work. I love God. I'm creative and I have an amazing wife. So if I didn't have social media, I would definitely disclose that. She's solid.
So
yeah.
That's amazing.
Those are my 3.
It's been so fun having you on the podcast and just hearing your experience. And man, I would say that since the last 4 years, I would imagine have been a big learning curve for you. But I love to tell people.
For sure.
I'll tell you this one thing. There's one consistent thing that I hear other people say about you and Laura is that you guys are amazing. Like I always hear nothing but praises from people in the community when they talk about you guys. And you have such an amazing character, reputation of just like integrity, honor, the way you do business. It's always, you're putting people first. I've seen that countless times when we're dealing with crazy situations with guests or doing stuff with employees, cleaners, whatever. I feel like you always have people in mind, their heart. You want to take care of people. And I think that it really shows that you are a follower of Christ. Like you really, you follow Jesus and what he, like how he taught, how he lived. You see it in your life, in your marriage, the way you love Laura. So I just want to, man, thank you, celebrate you. You're an amazing man. I definitely have been inspired by the way you do life, and nothing but love and respect.
Thank you. I appreciate that, man. Yeah,
So
that means
good.
a lot.
So
Thanks so much.
And if we were to just say you do have social media, where would we find you on social media?
Yeah, it's funny. I've kind of been off the map with social media right now, so I don't have a great spot to point people to.
Okay,
I love that
moment.
actually.
Yeah. It's kind of great. It's really very actually kind of refreshing and inspiring. So
yeah. I plan to jump on there and be more active with it soon, but right now we've kind of been
So
on the back
basically,
burner.
if we want to get in touch with you, we need to book a room at Cave Springs.
That's right.
CaveSprings.com. All right, cool.
Let's go.
Yeah.
All
All right, God bless you too. See you, Aaron.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.